Sports List
with Summer Sanders.
the show that counts down anything
And everything.
in the world of sports.
The most shocking upsets, the best sports heroes, the sexiest athletes, the biggest sports scandals, and much more. Hosted by Summer Sanders.
Every night, a new list.
Every night, the new argument. The Sports List, next on FSA.
Mandarich was a fraud.
So I should be paid the most.
That's a front office blunder.
Don't talk to me, all right?
The Cowboys wouldn't have won those 3 championships if that trade doesn't happen.
Hindsight's 20/20.
You can put it on the board. Yes.
Who did the Dodgers even get for Pedro?
That one is terrible.
Magic's got to get their money back for that.
Had they seen tape of Jim McIlvaine?
They gave us Lou Brock for who?
Reality was he didn't know Bagwell's potential.
And thus the curse was born.
I'm speechless.
Welcome to the Sports List. I'm Summer Sanders. Tonight's show is dedicated to the owners, bean counters, and general managers whose decisions have devastated the teams they run. It's the top 10 front office blunders in sports history. Now, it's one thing to make a terrible trade, but when you do it with your arch rival, the pain never goes away. Just ask any Cub fan how they feel about our number 10 blunder, Lou Brock for Ernie Broglio.
The Lou Brock trade was absolutely ridiculous.
You know, it's easy to look back on these trades and go, oh, that was a terrible trade. But at the time, of course, you know, everybody thinks it's great.
Lou Brock, sorry, Cubs fans. You guys had him, and you just, well, we'll give him away for a sack of potatoes.
Looking to bolster a weak pitching staff, the 1964 Chicago Cubs decided to send Lou Brock, a speedy but strikeout-prone outfielder, to the rival St. Louis Cardinals for pitcher Ernie Broglio.
And then they're stupid on top of being bad. They give us good players. I'm like, they gave us Lou Brock for who?
But at the time, Cub fans were like, yeah, we got Broglio for Brock.
Ernie Broglio just came off a 17-game win, so we thought it was good at the time.
Even my dad doesn't know who Ernie Broglio was. He was a fat pitcher that, for some reason, the Cubs thought they needed to finish last.
Brock led the Cardinals to 3 World Series and was eventually elected into the Hall of Fame. Broglio only won 7 games for the Cubs over 4 years.
I was looking for the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. I mean, that's not right. That's a bad transaction.
At least back then, a terrible front office move only cost you utter humiliation and a few $1,000 bucks. In 1996, when the Seattle Supersonics signed free agent Jim McIlvaine, that cost him $33 million. And that deal comes in at number 9. In his first 2 seasons in the NBA, Jim McIlvaine averaged less than 2 points and 2 rebounds per game. But that didn't stop the Seattle Supersonics from signing him to a $33 million deal.
Can you imagine being in the Sonics front office and say, you know what we need? We're going to win the championship. Well, you know what we need? Michael Jordan? No, not Michael Jordan. You know what we need? We need Jim McIlvaine. They needed a center. They needed a big man in Seattle. Got Jim McIlvaine. They still needed a big man because he wasn't the answer to their problems.
Not only was he not the answer, but his contract led to star Sean Kemp's frustration and eventual departure from Seattle. During McIlvaine's 2 years in Seattle, he averaged just 3.5 points per game.
I don't know if he would have got that deal today, but he has to be absolutely thrilled wherever he's sitting right now inside of a mansion.
Well, where is he now? Exactly, right? Bye-bye.
We move now from a guy who could only block shots to a guy who couldn't block anything. Hailed as the greatest offensive tackle prospect in football history, Tony Mandarich was drafted with the 2nd overall pick by the Packers. He'll never have a bust in Canton, but this bust makes our list at number 8.
Pretty simple. I'm the #1 rated player coming out of college, so I should be paid the most.
I remember having Tony Mandarich on my show one time. He was the biggest, hugest man I've ever seen in my life. He was talking about Guns N' Roses was his biggest influence in his life. And I said, what do you hope to accomplish in the National Football League? He says, I want to be an immortal before my time.
Labeled the best offensive lineman prospect ever by Sports Illustrated before he ever played a game in the NFL, the Green Bay Packers saw the 6'6", 340-pound Tony Mandarich as the cornerstone of their future.
There's so much hype of these guys coming out of college. Just because you're good in college doesn't mean you're going to be good in the pros.
He's supposed to be the super prototype, combination of science and nature, and the guy couldn't play. And once he got to the NFL, he got exposed.
And for them to not know that he was on something.
I'm embarrassed to mess around.
He was good until the steroids wore off.
Oh, God, we got to go back, see who they passed up. Who went next?
They passed on Barry Sanders for Tony Mandarich.
I don't care if he was the best tackle in the history of football. I think you got to take Barry Sanders.
Mandarich was a fraud.
He got paid for being big, put it that way. You're going to have that man looking for me. And I'm going to run.
The awful decision-making has just begun. More boneheaded front office blunders when the sports list returns. In 2000, the Portland Trailblazers traded for Sean Kemp and his $107 million 7-year contract, hoping he would resurrect his days with the Sonics. After 2 miserable seasons, Kemp agreed to a buyout. Welcome back to the Sports List, where we are counting down the top 10 front office blunders of all time. In the mother of all bad sign and trade deals, the Orlando Magic not only took on Grant Hill for $93 million, they gave up big bad Ben Wallace in the exchange. With this one ill-fated move, the Magic went from contenders to pretenders and land at number 7.
9 years? No. Grant Hill's not been in the league for 9 years. Has he really? Oh, he's a disappointment.
In the 99-2000 season, Grant Hill was an all-star starter and helped the Pistons to the playoffs.
Grant Hill was the most phenomenal player around. I mean, he's unstoppable.
The Orlando Magic traded backup center Ben Wallace for Hill and signed him to a 7-year, $93 million contract. But numerous ankle surgeries have limited him to less than 50 games over the first 4 years of his contract.
I'm slamming the Pistons. How can you trade Grant Hill for a bunch of stiffs? Who's Ben Wallace? And now, Ben Wallace is one of the great defensive players of his time, and Ben Wallace has a championship, and Grant Hill, God love him, still trying to come back.
$93 million, what is it, 6 years, played under 50 games. I'll take it. The fans may not be happy. I may be the most hated person, but I'll tell you what, I'll buy my friends.
Magic's got to get their money back for that.
I mean, he gets to keep the money, and he's got a hot wife, Tamia, who can sing. You know what? I don't feel sorry for Grant Hill. Life is good.
Why do bad things happen to good people? I mean, Grant Hill is such a good guy. You know, you don't go 86 years and counting without winning a World Series unless your front office comes up with some doozies. At number 6, the Red Sox trade Jeff Bagwell for Larry Anderson.
Classic pennant race trade that comes back to haunt a team, not just for 1 year, but for over a decade.
How do these things happen? And the explanation is always the same. We needed a pitcher, they needed a hitter.
Late in the 1990 season, the Boston Red Sox felt that they were one player away from making the playoffs. Red Sox GM Lou Gorman traded AA MVP Jeff Bagwell to the Astros for pitching help in the form of Larry Anderson.
Larry Anderson was a reliever. Today, the way relievers are valued, this trade never would have been made.
I was just like, that is so stupid. It was stupid, and I knew it was stupid. They traded a guy that's a Hall of Famer. Anderson stayed like 2 months. Look at Bagwell. It's just, oh, God.
In Anderson's 15 games with the Red Sox, he won 0 games and saved only 1. Bagwell, meanwhile, developed into a Hall of Fame first baseman.
To the Astros. High drive to left field, number 400 in his career.
But Lou Gorman, to this day, says, hey, I do the same thing. We had a chance to win. The reality was he didn't know Bagwell's potential.
Jeff Bagwell became one of the great hitters of this generation.
Yeah, the Red Sox have to look back and cringe on that. They could have used him at first base for the last couple of decades.
At least Red Sox general manager Lou Gorman didn't have to watch the Astros win 3 championships as a result of the trade, which is exactly what Vikings GM Mike Lynn had to endure after giving the Cowboys the store in exchange for Herschel Walker. It's the number 5 front office blunder of all time.
All the planets have to align for these major things to happen.
For that trade, Jimmy Johnson should go to his grave. Thank you, brother. Amen.
Herschel Walker, a former Heisman Trophy winner, was a productive NFL running back for the Dallas Cowboys.
He did it all. You know what I mean? He was power and speed. You know what I mean? He could run at people and run through them if he needed to.
Even with Herschel Walker, the Cowboys couldn't make their way into the playoffs. So in 1989, they sent Walker and draft picks to the Minnesota Vikings for 3 players and 8 draft picks. Dallas used the picks to draft Emmitt Smith, Russell Maryland, Darren Woodson, and a bunch of other players who helped them win 3 Super Bowls in the 90s.
For the Dallas Cowboys, who once again reign supreme as Super Bowl champions.
The Cowboys wouldn't have won those 3 championships if that trade doesn't happen.
The Vikings get a guy that just really could never turn the corner.
They tried everything in Minnesota. They even tried to have him return kicks again.
If Herschel Walker had been traded to a team that had an astonishing offensive line, he would have been in the top 3 of the greatest running backs of all time.
Ironically, the thing he'll be most remembered for during his NFL career is the trade, and that really set the foundation for the Cowboys' glory years in the early 1990s.
I hope Jimmy Johnson at least sent Mike Lynn a thank you card, or maybe a fruit basket, because those were so nice. We're closing in on the worst transaction of all time when the Sports List returns. We are back wheeling and dealing on the Sports List as we count down the top 10 front office blunders in sports. You gotta hand it to Larry Hines. He made not 1, but 2 organizations look foolish by stealing Sammy Sosa. First, he did it to the Rangers as GM of the White Sox. Then he did it to the White Sox as GM of the Cubs. Dealin' Sammy is number 4.
Here's a look at Sammy.
Sammy Sosa, he's hot, but he's been treated like a hot potato. You know, it's kind of like, you take him.
Even God would go, you did the trade? What is that?
Sammy Sosa is the only player to hit over 60 home runs in 3 seasons, but 2 organizations didn't think he was worth keeping around.
Nobody wanted him. He just kept going from team to team. The Rangers to the White Sox and to the Cubs.
When the White Sox traded Sosa for George Bell, I mean, the White Sox were in it. I mean, they went to the playoffs with George Bell. The Cubs were going nowhere.
You can put it on the board. Yes!
He was a guy who struck out a lot, who had a lot of tools, but no one was sure he was going to be a great baseball player. And sometimes it takes a trade to wake a player up a little bit, and I think that's part of what made Sammy Sammy.
It'd be a much bigger blunder if you trade Sosa today. You saw his potential, but he wasn't the all-star that he is now, back then.
Well, you got to remember, this is Sammy Sosa pre-weightlifting.
It is good! Number 58 for Slamming Sammy Sosa!
So it's tough to second-guess those guys. I mean, some of them look really stupid in retrospect. It was a great trade for the White Sox for a couple of years. I mean, who knew what was going to happen to Sammy?
From one Dominican superstar to another. While the knock on Sammy was that he was too undisciplined at the plate, the knock on Pedro Martinez was that he was too small. After trading Pedro for Delino DeShields, it was the Dodgers that were feeling mighty small. That blunder is number 3.
Pedro Martinez struck him out.
Who did the Dodgers even get for Pedro?
The Dodgers trade Pedro Martinez for Delino DeShields. Let me tell you something. I watched Delino play. I remember the tears in the eyes of the fans as they watched him strike out consecutively again and again.
Feeling they were a second baseman away from becoming a top team, the Dodgers sent second-year reliever Pedro Martinez to Montreal for Delino DeShields.
Tommy Lasorda thought this guy was too small to be a starting pitcher. I think he made a mistake.
And Delino DeShields, what I love most about him is that his helmet always seemed about 8 sizes too big. He looked like Marvin the Martian.
At the time, we thought Delino DeShields was an all-star ball player for the Montreal Expos. Pedro Martinez was a reliever at the time. Who would have thought that Pedro Martinez would develop to be the greatest starting pitcher of his generation?
That one is terrible, terrible in retrospect. Can you imagine Pedro Martinez pitching in Dodger Stadium, a pitcher's park?
Pedro Martinez, the only 15-game winner in the major leagues to this point.
Pedro goes on to be the Cy Young winner, one of the dominant pitchers of our time. Delino DeShields of the Dodgers never hit over 256 in his 3 seasons with the team.
You make a stupid bonehead move like that, when you die, and they're giving you a eulogy, they go, and by the way, he instigated the Pedro Martinez trade.
Pedro may be small for a power pitcher, but you know what? He'll fit nicely in the Hall of Fame. The all-time front office faux pas when the sports list returns. The New York Mets threw their hat into the free agent ring in 1991 when they signed Pirate star Bobby Bonilla to a 5-year, $25 million contract.
Why are you being... Why would you have to use such language to me and insult me?
His on and off the field antics had them regretting their choice.
The Sports List will return on FSN.
Welcome back to the Sports List. Before revealing the top 2 front office blunders of all time, let's take a look at numbers 10 through 3.
Yeah, we got Broglio for Brock.
He certainly benefited, and rather handsomely.
There's so much hype of these guys coming out of college. Just because you're good in college doesn't mean you're going to be good in the pros.
I'm slamming the Pistons. How can you trade Grant Hill for a bunch of stiffs?
But Lou Gorman, to this day, says, hey, I'd do the same thing. We had a chance to win.
The Vikings get a guy that just really could never turn the corner.
We absolutely adore Sammy Sosa.
That one is terrible, terrible in retrospect.
Believe it or not, heading into the 1998 draft, there were some football people who thought Peyton Manning was only the second best quarterback on the board. But the Colts took Manning with the first pick, leaving the booby prize for the San Diego Chargers, who traded up to select Ryan Leaf.
I had heard way before this draft, they said, you know, someone's going to draft this Ryan Leaf kid. Am I allowed to say the word? That's the word I kept hearing. They said, this kid is so talented, but he's such a...
Ryan Leaf was pretty good at WSU.
Ryan Leaf, Pac-10 Offensive Player of the Year, led Washington State to the Rose Bowl. After the Colts selected Peyton Manning with the first pick in the '98 NFL Draft, the Chargers snapped up Leaf with the second.
And just blew it, man.
Don't talk to me, all right?
Your maturity level and how you see yourself is the key. You know, if Ryan Leaf had a father that played in the NFL, he probably would have been much more mature in understanding what he was about to get into, and maybe he would have had a different career.
I want to know what's wrong, man. Hey, man, that hurt you?
Hey,
No.
You hurt me? You hurt all? Ryan, good job.
You got no commitment.
Ryan Leaf evidently wasn't too bright.
It goes to show you these NFL combines, they have the time in the 40, they have how much they bench press per 3 minutes. I mean, how about a field sobriety test?
And it was just immaturity on his part, and he got some contract, though, out of that.
Loses the football.
It wasn't so much a front office blunder as that, you know, that Leaf didn't come through the way he probably should have.
You don't think you have a responsibility to act a certain way? No.
Potential is called potential for a reason. People who have talent are talented. People who have potential haven't reached their talent for a reason.
He went number 2 in the draft, he was number 2 on our list, and he played like number 2 for the Bolts. But of all the stupid moves in sports history, one looms above the rest. Red Sox owner Harry Frazee needed money to finance a Broadway show, so he did what any short-sighted idiot would do. He sold the greatest player of all time to the Yankees. At number 1, it's the Bambino.
Well, the toughest trade that anybody's made is probably Babe Ruth going to the Yankees, you know, and thus starting the whole curse thing with Boston.
In 1920, the Boston Red Sox, winners of 5 championships in 15 years, traded their heart and soul Babe Ruth to the New York Yankees for $125,000, which was used to finance the musical No No Nanette. They haven't won since.
I don't know. I think it was a good deal because that was a pretty impressive musical. You know, great ball players a dime a dozen, but good musicals, they're tough to find.
Selling Babe Ruth to the Yankees has to go down in history as the greatest blunder of all time. You didn't even get any talent back. You just got straight cash.
125 grand. You know, not bad money. You know, 125 grand back then could have bought the team.
Hindsight's 20/20. If Babe Ruth ended up being just a big old fat guy, way too many hot dogs, you know, drank too much beer, people wouldn't be saying it. But the fact that he was the game.
It's a different world back then. The Yankees, in some kind of guilt move, offered a young Lou Gehrig to the Red Sox for some no-name first baseman, and the Red Sox turned it down.
Babe Ruth goes, they win 26 championships.
for the Yankees. Babe Ruth goes from Boston. They have since won 0. 26-0.
Bucky, that. And thus the curse was born.
Little